Siberia, the Altai Mountains, 2010. The thermometer outside reads -20 degrees. A small group of researchers stands over a sieve filled with sorted rock fragments. In the tray, a bone, less than 3 centimeters, a fragment from a child's finger bone, the tip of a girl's pinky finger, a girl who died 50,000 years ago. They noted it, packed it, sent it for analysis, and weeks later in a Leipzig laboratory, everything went quiet. I welcome you. Today we'll walk through the story of people who didn't exist in textbooks, in museums, in anything we call human history. We'll discuss how one fragment of a child's bone rewrote everything science knew about our species, where these people lived and how far they spread from Siberian caves to islands across the Pacific, what exactly they left inside us, literally inside, in the DNA of living humans right now, and why their disappearance might be the most untold tragedy in the history of our kind. But first, forget everything you know about human evolution. That picture from the textbook. On the left, a hunched ape. On the right, an upright human. Between them, several figures becoming progressively more like us. A straight line, progress. One end point, us. That picture was invented in the 19th century, and it's wrong. Not a little wrong, not outdated. It's wrong at its very core. Because human evolution isn't a straight line. It's a dark, dense forest. Many branches, many dead ends, many intersections we didn't suspect 20 years ago. And most of these branches remain undiscovered, undescribed, unstudied. They simply vanished with the bones that could have told their stories. Because a bone doesn't sit for 1,000,000 years waiting to be found. It breaks down, slowly, relentlessly, layer by layer. Moisture, bacteria, chemical reactions. After thousands of years, only a fragment remains. After 10,000, a fragment of that fragment. After 100,000, nearly nothing. Only in special places, in dry, cold caves, in permafrost, in amber, can bone survive long enough for us to find it. Such places on Earth number only in the handful, which means everything we know about human evolution is what happened to end up in exactly those places. Not the complete story, fragments, pieces, pages torn from a book no one has ever read in full. Try to grasp the scale. Take today. Rewind 100,000 years. Not just before the pharaohs, not before the pyramids, not before Babylon or Sumer. Before our species even left Africa. Before we saw Europe. Before we reached Asia. Before we encountered anyone else. 100,000 years ago, there was no Moscow, no Beijing, no London, no Paris, no cities, no kingdoms, no writing, no wheels, no agriculture, no metal. Nothing of what we call human civilization had begun. Nothing. And yet in this world, in this darkness, several human species lived on Earth at the same time. Not one. Several. In Western Eurasia, Neanderthals, powerful, broad-shouldered, with brains as large as ours, some argue even slightly larger. They buried their dead. They cared for the injured. In caves, researchers find skeletons with healed fractures, impossible to survive without outside help. Someone tended them, fed them, protected them while they couldn't move. They decorated themselves with feathers and ochre. They made ornaments from eagle talons long before modern humans arrived in Europe. They walked this earth for 400,000 years. Think about that number. 400,000. Our entire written history spans the last 5,000 years. Neanderthals existed 80 times longer. If their history were a book, and ours the final page, then everything we call history, Rome, Greece, Egypt, China, Every war and empire, revolution and discovery, that's the last few lines on that last page. The other 395,000 years, blank pages. We don't know what was there. On the island of Flores in Indonesia, hobbits, Homo floresiensis, just over a meter tall, brains the size of an orange, small, light, quick. But they crafted stone tools, complex, multi-step in their making. They hunted dwarf elephants found only on that island, hunted in organized groups. They survived on an isolated island for hundreds of thousands of years. A small brain doesn't mean primitive. That's the key lesson the Flores hobbits taught us. Size doesn't determine intelligence. Capability does. In Africa, us, Homo sapiens, young, restless, curious species, just beginning to understand that land exists beyond the horizon, that the world is larger than what you can see from one hill, that you can walk and never reach the edge. We were around 300,000 years old then, young by evolutionary standards, nearly infants. And somewhere to the east, in mountains, in the caves of Siberia, in the foothills of Tibet, in the jungles of Southeast Asia, along riverbanks we don't know the names of, someone else lived. Someone science knew nothing about. Someone whose name in scientific literature appeared only in 2010. Someone who lived on this land, perhaps for 500,000 years. 500,000. And vanished so quietly we didn't notice they were gone for another 35,000 years after their deaths. The Denisovans. Stop for a moment. Just stop and think about that. An entire species of people that lived on this planet for hundreds of thousands of years, that spread across vast territory from Siberia to the Pacific Ocean, that left a mark in the genome of hundreds of millions of living people, that gave Tibetans the ability to breathe at altitude of 4,000 meters, that met our ancestors and left their genes inside us. This species was discovered by science in 2010, not in the 1800s, not not early 2000s. 2010, 15 years ago. Not in the Amazon jungle, not on the ocean floor, not on another continent. In Siberia, in Russia, in the Altai Mountains. In a cave where Soviet archaeologists had worked since the 1970s. They were right in front of us, literally, and we didn't see them. That's what it means to peer into the past through a narrow hole. And here's what strikes hardest. Not that they existed, not that they lived beside us, but how we found them. Not through a skull. A skull would have given us facial shape, brain size, bone structure. We could have imagined what they looked like. Not through a skeleton. A skeleton would have given us height, build, physical characteristics. We could have reconstructed their body. Not through cave paintings. Paintings would have shown us their culture, what mattered to them, how they saw the world. Not through tools, though they had tools, complex ones. Through a tiny piece of a child's finger bone. 3 centimeters of bone, less than a pencil eraser. The tip of a girl's pinky finger. A girl who died 50,000 years ago in an Altai cave and whom no one remembers. No one at all, for 50,000 years. One fragment, one genetic analysis, and an entire species of people emerged from darkness. This alone is one of the most extraordinary stories in the history of science. But before we turn to that story, to the laboratory, to the scientist who changed everything, I want you to feel once more what we're talking about. 100,000 years ago, several human species lived on this planet. None of them knew they were part of something larger. None suspected that 100,000 years later, Their descendants would sit before screens listening to the story of who they were. They just lived, hunted, raised children, watched the same stars. And some of them, those we called Denisovans, disappeared. Without trace, without memory, without a name. Until 2010. Now let's figure out what happened in that Altai cave. What scientists found, and how a small bone could overturn science. Because from this moment begins one of the most incredible detective stories I've ever told. Denisova Cave, Altai region, Russia, where Russia borders Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and China all at once. Mountains, the Anui River, dense coniferous forests, bears, snow, 8 months a year. Local people knew this cave long ago. According to legend, in the 18th century a hermit named Dionysius lived here. In Russian, Denis. That's where the name comes from. Denisova Cave, Denis's cave. No science involved, just an old man who chose this place to live in silence. Soviet archaeologists started excavating in the 70s. The cave proved rich, very rich. Layers of cultural deposits went down several meters. Stone and bone tools, ornaments, remains of hearths, animal bones, all accumulating here for tens of thousands of years. The cave was inhabited almost continuously, first by ancient people, then by Neanderthals, then by early Homo sapiens. Layer upon layer, epoch after epoch. Season after season, researchers dug and found and documented. Routine. Then 2008 arrives, another expedition. In one layer, at a depth corresponding to an age of 40 to 50,000 years, they find a small bone fragment, a finger bone, distal phalanx, the very tip, the part beneath which we have a nail. Smaller than 3 centimeters. By its proportions, from a child, a teenage girl. They recorded it, catalogued it, packed it. No fuss, no premonition. Just another bone in a long list of finds. The sample was sent to Leipzig, to the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, to a man the scientific community simply called Paavo. Svante Paavo, Swedish by birth, son of a Nobel Prize laureate, obsessed with Egypt and mummies since childhood. He was the one who, in the 1980s, while still a graduate student, secretly took samples from an Egyptian mummy and tried to extract DNA from it. It was adventure. It was nearly madness. But it worked. From that moment, Paavo devoted his life to one task: learning to read the genetic code of the dead, the ancient dead, those who died tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago. It sounds simple. In reality, incredibly difficult. DNA is not stone. It doesn't lie and wait. It breaks down. Degradation begins immediately after death. Molecules disintegrate, bacteria consume remains, chemical reactions finish the destruction. After 1,000 years, DNA fragments remain. After 10,000, scraps of fragments. After 100,000, nearly nothing. A few scattered molecules among tons of foreign organic matter. Imagine a book. You kept it in water for 1,000 years, then burned it, then stomped on it, then mixed it with 10 other burned books. Now try to recover the original text from a few charred letters. That's what Paavo did every day, for years. By 2008, his team had already decoded a significant portion of the Neanderthal genome. This alone was revolutionary, but the Leipzig laboratory didn't stop. Every new sample was a chance to learn something new. The Denisova cave sample sat in the queue with others. They processed it by standard protocol. They extracted mitochondrial DNA, not the entire genome, just a small part that passes through the maternal line and survives better than nuclear DNA. They ran the sequencing and got a result that matched nothing. The mitochondrial DNA of the little girl from the Altai cave differed from ours roughly twice as much as Neanderthal mitochondrial DNA differed from ours. That's a colossal difference. That means the lineage leading to this being split from our common line with Neanderthals much earlier, roughly 1 million years ago. 1 million years. In the lab, they rechecked, again and again. They ruled out contamination, the enemy of paleogenetics, when modern human DNA gets into a sample and ruins results. Everything was clean. Parbo looked at the results and understood one thing. This is not a Neanderthal. This is not Homo sapiens. This is an unknown species. This is someone third. In December 2010, in the journal Nature, an article appeared. Authors Parbo and his team. The title was measured, but the content was like an explosion. A new human species, discovered not from a skull, not from a skeleton, but from mitochondrial DNA from a fragment, a child's finger bone. The scientific world reacted in different ways. #Denisovans, the ghost species living in modern humans. Some were shocked, others remained skeptical. How could you describe an entire species from a single bone? Still others immediately started searching for more samples, re-examining already known findings, digging deeper. And the discoveries kept coming. In Denisova cave itself, they found a tooth, large, a molar. Unlike anything from modern humans or Neanderthals, too massive, too primitive in form. They'd actually found it earlier, back in the 2000s, but didn't know what to make of it. Now they did. DNA confirmed a Denisovan. Then came another tooth, then a piece of lower jaw. Then in 2018, a small piece of skull bone, tiny, just a fingernail-sized fragment, but enough for analysis. And this analysis brought a stunning surprise. The bone belonged to a teenage girl. A different girl, not the one whose finger bone had revealed Denisovans to the world. Her father was a Denisovan. Her mother was a Neanderthal. The first documented direct hybrid of two different human species in all of science. Not indirect statistical evidence, not a theory, a concrete person, a concrete girl, a concrete mother and father from two separate species. Scientists called her Denny, unofficially, simply Denny. She lived roughly 90,000 years ago in that same cave, in those same mountains. And she was living proof that between these human species, there was no impenetrable barrier. They encountered each other. They lived nearby. They were close enough to produce children together. They were completely and truly human beings. By this point, Denisova Cave had become one of the most important places on Earth, not because it held countless artifacts, but because it preserved DNA. The cold, dry Altai climate, stable temperatures inside, created perfect conditions for genetic material preservation. A natural archive, a natural vault holding 50,000 years of an entire species' history. And they had only begun reading it. While scientists studied DNA from that Siberian cave, others across the world held something in their hands that would show Denisovans existed not just in the Altai, they were everywhere. And this is where the story becomes truly extraordinary. Imagine Tibet, not modern Tibet with monasteries and tourists, Tibet 70,000 years ago. Plateau at 4,000 meters above sea level. Air so thin oxygen sat 40% lower than at ground level. In winter, temperatures plummeted to -30 Celsius. In summer, they barely broke 10 degrees. Glaciers, ridges and slopes, and a piercing wind that never stopped. A modern human at such altitude without training starts struggling to breathe within hours. Headaches split your skull. Your heart hammers wildly. Your body doesn't understand what's happening. Oxygen becomes catastrophically scarce. Without special adaptation, without gear, without the genetic traits modern Tibetans possess, an ordinary person simply dies. Mountain sickness, brain swelling, lung edema. Now imagine, 70,000 years ago, people actually lived there. Not passing through, not camping for a few days, living, hunting, raising children, generation after generation. How was this possible? The answer came from a Buddhist monastery. 2019. A valley and a cave, the Tibetan Plateau. 3,280 meters above sea level. Local monks considered this cave sacred, housing a jawbone, large, massive, unlike any human jaw. They kept it as a holy relic. Scientists learned of it in the 90s. They took a sample, tried to extract DNA. Nothing worked. Too dry. No DNA remained at all. But in 2019, they applied a different method. Proteomics. Not DNA analysis, but protein analysis. Proteins survive far longer, much longer. And through protein composition, you can determine what species it came from. The result was clear. The jaw belonged to a Denisovan. Age, at least 160,000 years. Stop. 160,000 years. The oldest remains in Denisova Cave date to roughly 130,000 years. But Denisova Cave is in the Altai, a moderate climate zone, a rich ecosystem. You could live there. Tibet is different. Extreme altitude, catastrophically low oxygen. Conditions where most people without training simply cannot function normally. Yet Denisovans lived there 160,000 years ago. That means they had adaptation, genetic, physiological. Something in their bodies let them breathe thin air, survive brutal cold, thrive where other human species never even tried to establish themselves. And here begins what truly amazes us. That adaptation never left. It lives today. Modern Tibetans are the only humans on Earth who can live at 4,000 meters altitude without chronic mountain sickness. Their hearts beat slower. Their lungs work differently. Their blood carries oxygen more efficiently. Geneticists knew about this trait for years and searched long for its source. In 2010, they found it. A gene called EPAS1. It regulates how your body responds to low oxygen. Tibetans carry a special version. It exists in almost every Tibetan and almost nowhere else on the planet. Where did it come from? In 2014, geneticists compared the Tibetan version of EPAS1 against all known genomes and found a match. Denisovans. They carried exactly this version. They gave Tibetans the power to breathe atop the world's roof. Denisovans lived on Tibet. They met the ancestors of Tibetans. They had children. Those children inherited a gene that let them breathe where others suffocate. Denisovans vanished, but their gift remained. Think about this truly. Every time a Tibetan monk climbs a mountain without gasping, a Denisovan gene works. Every time a Tibetan herder drives cattle to 4,000-meter pasture and returns alive, a Denisovan gene works. Every time a Tibetan baby is born at altitudes where most people cannot sleep properly, a Denisovan gene works. A gene from a species that no longer exists. They went extinct, yet their biology lives on in people. And this is only Tibet, only one place, only one story of how far Denisovans ranged. Because meanwhile, other scientists began analyzing DNA from modern people worldwide, and what they discovered overturned everything known about Denisovan territory and numbers. It turned out Denisovan traces appear in human genomes across all of Asia. East Asians, Chinese, Japanese, Koreans carry 1 to 2% Denisovan DNA. South Asians roughly the same. A small percentage, but it exists. But the highest Denisovan DNA content isn't in Siberia or China or Tibet. It's on the opposite side of the planet. Papuans from New Guinea and Aboriginal Australians carry 4 to 6% Denisovan DNA, sometimes higher, 3 to 4 times more than mainland Asians. Papuans, New Guinea, Pacific Islands. How did Denisovans reach there? How could a species whose physical remains were found only in Siberia and Tibet leave such a powerful trace in people living on tropical islands thousands of kilometers from the Altai? There's only one answer. Denisovans were everywhere. Not scattered to a few places, but across all of East and Southeast Asia. From Tibetan mountains to tropical jungles, from high plateaus to Pacific shores. Widely distributed, successful, adaptable species. Yet here arises a paradox scientists still debate. If Denisovans spread so far, why do we find their physical remains in only 2 places? Why no skulls, no skeletons, no caves with paintings? First answer: tropical climate, humidity, heat. These destroy bone within thousands of years. In Denisova Cave, bone survived because it was cold and dry. In Borneo's jungles, Denisovan bones would leave nothing, absolutely nothing, not a particle. Second answer: we're simply not looking in the right places. Denisovan paleogenetics is young, 15 years old. The planet is vast. Most potential Denisovan sites remain unexcavated, or were dug long ago without genetic testing. One species, entire continents, hundreds of thousands of years, and nowhere, not a single skull for a museum. But they left something behind. Not bone, not paintings, something far more durable. Something that outlasted their extinction by tens of thousands of years and still functions now. They left us themselves, inside us. 2010, Leipzig, Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology. Svante Pääbo sits with printed genome data, staring at numbers that shouldn't exist. He already knows about Denisovans. The paper came out. The world learned. A new human species, discovered from a single finger bone. The year's scientific sensation. But Pääbo looks not at Denisovan data. He looks at modern human genomes, living humans. And he sees something not yet public. Fragments. Small DNA sections that don't match African genomes. Sections appearing in non-African populations, in Asians, in Pacific dwellers, and surprisingly similar to Denisovan genomes. Not random noise, not analysis error. A trace. A contact trace. September 2010. Pääbo publishes a second sensation in 1 year. Denisovans interbred with ancestors of modern humans. Their DNA lives in us right now, in this moment, as you listen to these words. And here we must pause and truly understand what this means. When scientists say Denisovan traces exist in our DNA, they don't speak metaphorically, not of cultural influence. They speak literally. In your genome. In DNA molecules present in every cell of your body right now, there are sequences inherited directly from Denisovans. They got there because roughly 50 to 80,000 years ago, a Denisovan and a modern human met, and they had a child. That child grew up, had children of their own, and through thousands of generations down to you, you carry part of a species no longer here. This isn't poetic metaphor. It's biological fact. But how much exactly? How much Denisovan lives in modern humans? The answer depends on who you are and where your ancestors came from. If your ancestors are from Western Europe or Africa, you carry almost no Denisovan DNA. 0. Denisovans either didn't reach Europe or didn't meet European ancestors in numbers large enough to leave traces. If your ancestors are from East Asia, China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, Thailand, you carry roughly 0.2 to 1% Denisovan DNA. Small, but it's there. If your ancestors are from Tibet, you carry Denisovan DNA in a specific place, the EPAS1 gene itself. A functional Denisovan sequence still determining how your body performs at altitude. But if your ancestors are from Papua New Guinea, the Moluccas, Australia, the Philippines, you carry 4 to 6% Denisovan DNA, some groups up to 8%. 8% is enormous. For scale, Europeans carry about 2% Neanderthal DNA in their genomes, considered a substantial trace. 8% Denisovan is 4 times greater. Why so much in Pacific peoples and so little in East Asians? This is one of paleogenetics' biggest questions today. One hypothesis: ancestors of Papuans and Aboriginal Australians moved through Southeast Asia roughly 50 to 60,000 years ago, exactly when Denisovans were most numerous there. Contact was intense, sustained, repeated. The genome trace reflects this. Ancestors of East Asians arrived later, took different routes, or encountered Denisovans when populations were already smaller. No definitive answer yet, but the fact stands. Denisovan DNA lives in hundreds of millions of people on Earth right now. It doesn't just sit inert. It works. We already discussed the EPAS1 gene in Tibetans, but that's not the only example. Recent research shows Denisovan DNA segments in Pacific populations connect to immune system traits. Specifically, genes regulating immune responses to infection, HLA genes, human leukocyte antigens. They determine how your immune system recognizes foreign cells and pathogens. Papuans and Aboriginal Australians possess unique versions of these genes, variants tracing back to Denisovans, versions that gave these populations advantage against tropical diseases, malaria, tropical viruses, parasites that never existed in Africa, that our kind had never encountered before. The Denisovans lived in these conditions for hundreds of thousands of years. Their immune systems adapted. And when modern humans came into the tropics, they received from Denisovans a ready-made solution, not invented, not forged through millennia of disease and death, simply passed on through DNA like a manual, like a gift, from a species that no longer existed. This is called adaptive introgression, adaptation through interbreeding, and the Denisovans gave us some of its most striking examples in the history of our species. Recent research also points to connections between Denisovan genes and metabolic features in East Asian populations, dental structure characteristics, certain skin traits, all indirect traces. Not as clear-cut as in high-altitude adaptation, but they paint a picture. The Denisovans contributed to our species more than just a few percentage points of DNA. They brought concrete adaptations to concrete environments. They made us better suited to worlds they had already inhabited long before our arrival. They prepared the planet for us without knowing it. And now comes a question that won't leave us alone. If Denisovans were so successful, so widely spread, so well adapted, capable of breeding with other human species, if they lived on this Earth for 500,000 years, why did they vanish? What happened? Who or what destroyed them? The answer is uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. Because if you look at the timeline, Denisovans began disappearing precisely when Homo sapiens started spreading across Asia. We arrived, and they vanished. How exactly this occurred is another story. The story of the last Denisovans, the story of a species that lived on this Earth for 500,000 years and ceased to exist in just a few thousand years. And this story contains details that chilling the blood. Try to imagine the moment of first contact, not abstractly, concretely. Somewhere in Southeast Asia, roughly 55,000 years ago. Dense forest, humid air, the smell of decaying leaves and a river somewhere nearby. Bird calls, branches snapping underfoot. A small group of people, maybe 20 to 30 individuals, moving along a shoreline searching for food. These are sapiens, our direct ancestors. They left Africa, crossed the Arabian Peninsula, moved through India along the shores of the Indian Ocean. They have been traveling for many generations. They don't know where they're going, simply toward food and water. And then, at some moment, one of them notices movement in the undergrowth. Someone is looking at him. Someone large, massive, with broader shoulders, with larger teeth, with more pronounced brow ridges. Not quite like them, but clearly human, clearly intelligent, clearly not threatening, at least not right now. This is a Denisovan. What happened next, we don't know precisely, but we know the result. It's written in the DNA of people alive today. They didn't go their separate ways. They didn't destroy each other immediately. They lived nearby for some time, and they had children together. But beside this fact stands another fact, cold and uncomfortable. The Denisovans disappeared. And we need to understand how a species that lived on this planet for 500,000 years vanished in just a few thousand years, precisely when we arrived on its territory. Let's start with the timeline. The latest Denisovan remains from Denisova Cave date to roughly 45 to 50,000 years ago, the final direct evidence of their existence. After that, silence. No bones, no teeth, no DNA from deposits, just disappearance. 45,000 years ago. This is exactly the period when Homo sapiens was actively spreading throughout Asia, when our ancestors were moving through Central Asia, through Siberia, through Southeast Asia, to the islands. This is not mere coincidence. This is a correlation that is very difficult to explain otherwise. But how exactly? That's a question without a simple answer. The first hypothesis is direct displacement. Sapiens arrived, occupied territories, seized resources, food, water, hunting grounds. Denisovans couldn't withstand the competition and starved. No war, no violence, simply slow, relentless pressure from a more successful competitor. This hypothesis works for large animals. When people arrive in new places, large mammals die with frightening regularity. Not because they're specifically hunted to extinction, but because the ecological balance that existed for millions of years gets disrupted. Resources become scarce, populations shrink, and within several thousand years, they're gone. The same might have happened to Denisovans. The second hypothesis is disease. Sapiens came from Africa. They carried pathogens to which Denisovans had no immunity. This is the same story that happened to native peoples of the Americas after Europeans arrived in the 15th and 16th centuries. Smallpox, measles, influenza, diseases that Europeans had multi-generational immunity to, wiped out 50 to 90% of the New World's population. Not weapons, not conquest, microbes. A biological collapse could have happened to Denisovans before direct contact even began. Sapiens appeared on the horizon, and disease went ahead unseen, unstoppable. The third hypothesis is assimilation. Denisovans weren't destroyed, they dissolved, gradually, generation after generation, interbreeding with sapiens, losing their separate identity. Their populations grew smaller, sapiens' populations grew larger. Within a few thousand years, pure-blooded Denisovans simply didn't exist anymore. Only hybrids who eventually became indistinguishable from Homo sapiens. They didn't die, they became us. This hypothesis is appealing, and there's truth in it. We already know interbreeding occurred. The girl called Denny, with her Denisovan father and Neanderthal mother, direct proof. But assimilation is rarely the only factor. Usually it happens alongside displacement and disease. One pulls the others along. The fourth hypothesis is climate. Between 50 and 70,000 years ago, Earth's climate was unstable. Sharp cold spells alternated with warm periods. Sea levels changed. Ecosystems reorganized. Denisovans, bound to specific landscapes and specific prey types, might simply not have adapted in time. Sapiens adapted. They were more flexible, more diverse in survival strategies, ate everything edible, lived everywhere habitable, invented new tools faster. Denisovans were too specialized, too tied to their niches. When niches changed, they couldn't restructure. Most likely, the truth is a combination of all four. Climate weakened populations, disease added pressure, competition for resources intensified, assimilation absorbed those who survived, and slowly, very slowly, across several thousand years, the species vanished. But was there a last Denisovan? Of course there was, somewhere, at some point. The final individual, or the final small group that could no longer find partners of their kind, who lived out their remaining years in a world where everything around them had changed. We don't know where this happened. We don't know exactly when. Maybe 40,000 years ago, maybe 30. Genetic data indicates that the last contacts between Denisovans and ancestors of Pacific populations occurred roughly 30 to 40,000 years ago. So some Denisovans were still alive at that time, somewhere in Southeast Asia, on islands, in jungles, the last ones. And here I want to pause for a moment, because it's easy to talk about species and populations and genetic data, easy to operate in millennia and DNA percentages. But behind these numbers were living beings. Denisovans weren't abstractions. They weren't just collections of genes. They lived, hunted, felt pain and fear and joy. They cared for their children. They possessed their own knowledge of the world, their own ways of making fire, their own traditions, perhaps their own music. We don't know if they had language in the sense we understand it, but we know they had large brains, that they created ornaments. In Denisova cave, they found a bracelet made from carefully polished chlorite, with holes clearly made for hanging, around 50,000 years old. The technology involved was so complex that scientists initially doubted the dating. Such stoneworking sophistication was considered impossible for that era, but the dating was confirmed. Denisovans knew how to make beautiful things. They valued beauty. And they vanished. The last Denisovans lived somewhere in the jungles of Southeast Asia or on some island in the Pacific Ocean, alone or surrounded by a few others like them, without knowing they were last, without awareness that their species was ending, just living. And at some point, they stopped. And the world didn't notice. We didn't notice. We didn't know about them for another 35,000 years after they disappeared. Until Leipzig Labs, until Pabo, until a small bone from an Altai cave. But you know what? They still left a trace. Not writing, not pictures, not stories. They left themselves, fragments of their genome that continue working in living people. A gene that lets us breathe at 4,000 meters altitude, immune variants that protect against tropical diseases. That's all that remains of them. But it's more than it seems at first glance. Much more. There's a question scientists don't like asking out loud, not because it's incorrect, not because it's unscientific, but because the answer is too uncomfortable, too close to something we prefer not to think about ourselves. The question sounds like this: are we guilty? Homo sapiens, our species, we. Are we guilty of the Denisovans' disappearance? Of the Neanderthals' extinction? Of the fact that out of at least 4 human species living simultaneously on this planet, only one survived, and that one is us? To answer this question honestly, you have to look at the bigger picture.
Much bigger, because the story of Homo sapiens is a story of disappearances. Everywhere we arrived, something vanished. 45,000 years ago, our ancestors reached Australia. Before that, megafauna lived on the continent. Giant marsupials the size of rhinoceroses, enormous flightless birds, reptiles 6 meters long. Within a few thousand years after people arrived, all of it was gone. Not a single one. Not a single giant bird. Not one marsupial lion. Not one diprotodon. Climate change occurred too, but the extinction rate matches precisely the rate of human settlement. Literally. A wave of people moves east, a wave of extinctions follows. 13,000 years ago, people reached the Americas. Before them, mammoths lived there, mastodons, giant sloths tall as giraffes, saber-toothed cats, American horses and camels. Within 2,000 years of human arrival, all of it was gone. Not a single one. Not a single mammoth on the plains. Not one giant sloth in the jungles. Climate again? Perhaps. But the pattern is too consistent to ignore. Polynesians reached Madagascar 1,500 years ago. Within a few centuries, elephant birds vanished. Giant birds 3 meters tall and half a ton heavy. Pygmy hippopotamuses disappeared. Giant tortoises disappeared. Every time, in every new place. As soon as we appear, others begin to disappear. This isn't an accusation. This is a statement of fact. Our species possesses something that makes us fundamentally different from other predators. We don't just kill to eat. We transform ecosystems. We hunt organizationally, with tools, with strategy, with planning. We can destroy a species faster than it can adapt. And this applies not only to animals, it applies to other people. Look at the timeline. Neanderthals lived in Europe for 200,000 years. Sapiens appeared in Europe roughly 45,000 years ago. Within 5 to 10,000 years, Neanderthals vanished. Denisovans lived in Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. Sapiens came to Asia roughly 60,000 years ago. Within a few thousand years, Denisovans disappeared. Hobbits on the island of Flores survived until around 50,000 years ago, precisely when sapiens arrived in the region. Coincidence after coincidence. The same pattern everywhere. But here it's important to be honest with ourselves. We don't know exactly what happened. We have no chronicles, no eyewitnesses, no records. Only bone dating and genetic data.
And this data speaks of correlation, not definitive cause and effect. Climate change may have been the reason. Disease might have been. Perhaps it was sheer coincidence that aligned with our expansion. But one thing is certain. We were the only species to survive out of at least 4 human kinds. And we lived on not because we were the most compassionate, not because we were the most just, but because we were the most effective, the most adaptable, the most unrelenting in the struggle for survival. That's our strength. And that's our shadow. Yet the story of the Denisovans doesn't end with their disappearance. It continues. It continues in an unexpected direction. 2023. Geneticists from across the globe publish major studies of Pacific populations' genomes. They examine DNA from thousands of people on Pacific islands, from Papua New Guinea, from Australia. And they find something remarkable. The Denisovan DNA within these groups isn't uniform. It isn't the trace of a single event. There are multiple distinct marks from multiple different encounters. Researchers identify at least 2 separate streams of Denisovan DNA among oceanic peoples, and they differ from each other just as sharply as Denisovan DNA differs from Neanderthal DNA. What does this reveal? It means the ancestors of Papuans and Australian Aborigines encountered not one Denisovan group. They met several distinct populations, possibly several distinct subspecies. Altai Denisovans and Southern Denisovans, populations that split from each other hundreds of thousands of years ago and became different enough that their genomes diverged significantly. This transforms our picture entirely. The Denisovans weren't a single band in a Siberian cave. They were an entire world, a network of human populations scattered across vast territory, from the Altai to the Pacific. Each adapted to completely different environments, possibly speaking different languages, holding different customs, traditions, different ways of understanding reality. We use one word for them all, Denisovans. But that's like calling all humans on the planet by one name. Technically accurate, but behind that single word lies infinite variety. And most of that diversity is gone forever. From this entire world, from hundreds of thousands of years of existence, from countless generations of people who hunted and loved and died in Tibetan mountains and Borneo jungles and along rivers whose names we'll never know. From all of it, we have only a few teeth, a finger bone fragment, a piece of jaw, a skull fragment. Barely a handful. That's everything left of an entire civilization. But science advances. Paleogenetics moves at extraordinary pace. 20 years ago, the thought that we could decode the genome of a creature dead 50,000 years seemed like science fiction. Today, it's routine lab work. A decade ago, we couldn't extract DNA from the earth itself, from cave soil without bones. Now, in Denisova Cave, from each soil layer they pull DNA and find traces of beings who left no bones, just molecules scattered in earth, just echoes of life from thousands of years before. This changes everything. Because now we need only earth,
And there's earth in caves around the world, endless quantities. Svante Pääbo won the Nobel Prize in 2022 for his work in paleogenetics. He discovered the Denisovans. He decoded the Neanderthal genome. For the first time in Nobel history, the prize went to the discovery of a new human species, a species found from a bone fragment smaller than 3 centimeters. This is just the beginning of the Denisovan story. Each year brings new research. Each year we extract more data from old samples. Each year the map of the Denisovan world grows more detailed. And someday, in 10 years, in 20, in 50, we'll know enough to truly understand who they were. Not as a collection of genes or a category in taxonomy, but as people. Living, thinking, feeling people who inhabited this earth long before us and who, for a brief moment, became part of us. But before we close, there's one final question, the most important one, the one I've saved for last. What do the Denisovans tell us about ourselves? We've spent more than 40 minutes exploring the history of a species most people on Earth know nothing about. A species from which only a handful of bones remain, some percentage of DNA in living people. A species that inhabited this Earth perhaps 500,000 years, then vanished so quietly we didn't notice for 35,000 years after they were gone. The question is, what does that say about us? Not about the Denisovans, about us. We're used to thinking of human history as a single story, our story, Homo sapiens. One species, one line. From our first ancestors in Africa through the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, through classical civilization and the Middle Ages, to today, a single path, one victor, one narrative worth telling. But that's a convenient lie we tell ourselves. Reality is different. 100,000 years ago, several human species walked this planet at the same time. They encountered each other, they interbred, their stories intertwined for tens of thousands of years. And all that incredible diversity, all those different ways of being human, different adaptations, different cultures, different worldviews, vanished. One branch survived, us. And this should stop us, truly stop us. Not as an abstract fact, not as an interesting scientific detail for dinner conversation, but as something demanding an honest look at ourselves. Consider this. Right now, 8 billion humans inhabit Earth. One species. We're everywhere, from Antarctica to the Arctic, from Amazon jungles to the Gobi Desert. One species filling every corner of the planet. And it seems to us that this is how it's always been, that one human species is normal, natural. But it's not normal. It's an exception. Through most of our lineage's history, multiple human species always existed on Earth simultaneously, always. That was normal for millions of years. Multiple species, multiple stories, multiple ways of being human. One species is the anomaly. It's something that happened recently, and it didn't happen by chance. Think about this. Really think about it. The Denisovans ask us a simple question that's extraordinarily difficult to answer truly. What does it mean to be human? Not from a biological perspective. Fundamentally, the Denisovans made ornaments. That bracelet of chlorite found in Denisova Cave wasn't functional. It didn't help hunting or provide warmth or protect against predators. It was simply beautiful. And some individual Denisovan living 50,000 years ago spent time and effort making it beautiful, polished the stone to a shine, drilled a hole so precisely, so carefully, that scholars still debate which tool created it.
because that level of stonework was considered impossible for that era. Dating confirmed it. The technique confirmed it. The Denisovans knew how to make beautiful things. They valued beauty. That's what makes us human. Walking upright, larger brains, tool use. Chimpanzees do those too. But this impulse to make something beautiful, just beautiful.
Without practical purpose, without gain. Simply because beauty matters. That's human. The Neanderthals kept their dead. They placed them in graves with flowers and ochre. They adorned the bodies. This suggests they held something like an understanding of death, of what might come after, or simply that the deceased deserved respect, that their passing mattered, that you couldn't just leave the body and walk away. That's human too. The Denisovans lived in the polar night on the Tibetan plateau, in conditions where most modern people couldn't survive without technology. They didn't just survive, they thrived. They adapted so deeply that their adaptations still live in their descendants' bodies. That's something more than mere biology. That's will to live, persistence, the capacity to find a way when others would surrender. That's human too. The Denisovans, the Neanderthals, the flourished people, all were human in this sense. Not merely biologically, but fundamentally. They thought, felt, created, cared, grieved, rejoiced, feared darkness, loved their children. And they disappeared. All except us. There's something in this that demands pause. Not just noting it as a scientific fact, but feeling it, truly grasping the scale of what occurred. Picture silence. That moment when the last Denisovan died, somewhere on an island, or in jungle, or in a mountain valley we don't even know the name of. The final member of a species that walked this earth 500,000 years, that survived ice ages and warming periods, that spread from Siberia to the Pacific, that climbed Tibetan peaks and dove into warm Pacific waters. This last one didn't know they were last. They simply lived. And then they stopped. And with them went everything. Everything they knew, everything they could do, all the stories their people told about fire, all the songs, if they had them, all the words of the language they spoke, all the knowledge of plants and animals and stars and seasons accumulated over hundreds of thousands of years. All of it died with them, in a single moment. And the world didn't notice. We didn't notice. We lived alongside them. We met them. We even had children together. Yet we didn't notice when they left. We didn't write it down, didn't remember it, left no sign that they existed. We learned about it only 35,000 years later, from a bone. We didn't survive fair competition alone. We survived in a world where others lived, where beings existed beside us, similar enough that we could have common children, different enough to be a separate species. And every one of them vanished precisely when we arrived. This isn't cause for pride, but neither is it cause for guilt. It's cause for understanding. Because what our species did to other human species, this is no accident in our history, no coincidence. It's a pattern that repeats constantly. We arrive, we occupy, we displace. Sometimes we assimilate, sometimes we eliminate, usually both simultaneously, without thinking, without choosing. That's our nature, restless, expansive, unstoppable. And that same nature made us the only species to reach the moon, to decode our own genome, to build cities and compose symphonies and invent mathematics, to send probes beyond the solar system,
to find a bone the size of a fingernail in a Siberian cave. And from that bone, we construct an entire vanished world. We're capable of the incredible, and we're capable of the terrible, often at once, often in the same act. The Denisovans remind us of this, simply by existing, simply by the fact that they were, and now they're not. And we only learned about it now, only when science became precise enough to read a species' story from molecules scattered through ancient bone. But here's what matters to understand, what truly matters. They didn't disappear completely. Every time a Tibetan monk climbs into mountains and breathes thin air effortlessly, a Denisovan gene works. The EPAS1 gene, which arose in the Denisovans hundreds of thousands of years ago as an adaptation to high altitude, which passed through interbreeding to Tibetan ancestors, which right now determines how a Tibetan body functions at 4,000 meters, how the heart beats, how lungs breathe, how blood carries oxygen. This isn't metaphor, this is molecular reality. Every time someone from Papua New Guinea survives in tropical conditions where most people on Earth would fall ill, a Denisovan immune system is working. Those HLA variants embedded in our genetic code, inherited from the Denisovans who spent hundreds of thousands of years thriving in tropical climates and developing immunity to pathogens our African ancestors had never encountered. Every time a researcher peers through a microscope at fragmented prehistoric DNA and discovers something strange, something unprecedented, something that rewrites what we thought we knew, the Denisovans are speaking across the millennia.
Through 50,000 years, through a handful of bone fragments and several gigabytes of genetic sequences, through the frozen Altai soil that preserved their molecular traces until we arrived to find them, they never completely vanished. They became woven into our very fabric, literally at the molecular level, embedded in our genetics, expressed in our biology. Their biology flows through living human bodies right now. Their evolutionary solutions function in the bodies of distant descendants at this exact moment, as you're hearing these words. And this is what I want to leave you thinking about. 100,000 years back, somewhere in Asia, a Denisovan and a sapiens crossed paths. Perhaps they regarded each other with wariness. Perhaps they couldn't comprehend each other's languages. Perhaps they watched with simultaneous caution and intrigue, the way you observe something strange, yet unmistakably animate, manifestly conscious, distinctly not entirely alien. And then that wariness transformed into something else. From that specific encounter between two beings who were simultaneously similar and profoundly different, children were born. Children who survived, who had their own children. Across thousands of generations, spanning tens of thousands of years, down to the people living today, to Tibetan monks, to Papua's inhabitants, to every one of us carrying even the smallest trace of that ancient mingling. We're all descendants of these encounters in a real sense. We're not a pure species and never were. We're hybrid. We're the outcome of countless meetings, countless instances when different branches of humanity regarded one another and chose something beyond mere fear. Something beyond rivalry, something beyond displacement. Sometimes they chose something different. That something different persists within us today. The Denisovans disappeared as a species, yet they didn't lose entirely. Part of them survives. In Tibet's highlands, across Pacific archipelagos, and somewhere inside each of us, in the way we remember them, in the moment we pause and consider that others inhabited this world before us, that we weren't the first, that human history stretches longer, runs deeper, holds greater richness and tragedy than we learned in classrooms. that the world we inhabit rests on foundations of extinct worlds, that every step we take crosses ground where other people, other species, other narratives previously trod.
The least we might do is acknowledge that. Not because it will alter what has passed, it won't, but because it reshapes how we perceive the present, how we see others, those unlike us, those who inhabit different ways, think differently, experience the world through different lenses. The Denisovans were different, and they were utterly and completely human. That might be their most significant bequest to us. Not the mountain altitude adaptation gene, not the immune variations, but a reminder that humanity comprises more than a single expression, more than one pathway, more than one kind. Humanity is vaster than we imagine. It always has been.